Hiya! And welcome to Rogue Changes! Woo! I'm gonna just, Yeah, baby, let's go! Alright. One sec. Alright, let's get into it. Holy! It's happening! Wow! Flensing Knives. Jumping right in, Deathstalker, right? Jumping right into Deathstalker. Flensing Knives, this was the mutilate damage, the passive mutilate damage all the time. Gone. Thank God, that was the one we hated. Hunt them down, the auto attack damage, we also hated that one. Hopefully sometime soon. But for now, just a mutilate talent. It's replaced by this, which, if you remember Ink Pod from a thing, this thing, Ink Pod, it's this trinket. When you deal damage, it does it stacks up, and then when the target falls under a certain health percentage, in this case 20%, it just pops and does a bunch of damage. Now, the fact that this is plague damage means that it possibly could maybe work with things like Mastery, things like Shiv, Shadow Dance, Symbols on Subtlety, all that stuff, all the damage amps. Could also work with Caustic Spatter, because, yeah. So this is really sick. There are some gameplay stuff that could be weird, right? Because it's always 20%. So just off the top of my head, some concerns. One, if it works with Caustic Spatter, how big is this? Two, if it works with Shiv, we're going to be wanting to hold one charge of Shiv for this. Might be weird depending on the fight. Could be a little awkward. 3, with Sudden Demise in Mythic Plus. If Sudden Demise procs before this procs, could be a little bit cringe. Otherwise, I don't have a problem with it, at least on the Assassination side. And they could easily just, whitelist it to make it not work with those things if that gameplay sucks. So I'm not too concerned about that. Now, the mark changes. Everything we asked for! Whoa! No longer be reapplied if the target has a mark. That saves Subtlety. Subtlety could not use the capstone. So the fact that you can't reapply it anymore, thank God. Okay? Duration increased, so now you have a longer time to use the marks. Also a good change. This makes it a lot less stressful in Mythic Plus and AoE, where if you weren't using finishers on that target, like say you were off rupturing something else, right? It wouldn't count. So, good change. Although a little bit unnecessary in general. 30 seconds was kind of long enough already. If you were playing it properly. 60 seconds just kind of removes any doubt about this at all. The 30 seconds was just a problem because it could be reapplied, and so you could have like 9 stacks. And so all of these stacks would be such a big amount, and you couldn't work them down. So both of these changes combined kind of, a little bit of gears turning. So this kind of wasn't that necessary, but still fine. We still enjoy it. Applies 3 stacks again. That's also good, I think. So here's the thing. 2 stacks better, 3 stacks good, because more capstone. But I think the way that the tree works, having Darkest Night proccing so often, like every third in Venom, kind of a bit much. And so it applying 3 stacks now with all of these other changes combined, I think makes sense for what the tree should be and for what the gameplay is that they want. Plague damage consuming a mark has been increased. Okay, so just, mark buff. Before it was like, God, remembering numbers. I think the mark was like 1.3%, 1.2%, something like that, 1.5%, something in that range. It's definitely less than 2%. somewhere in like the 1.5 range. So increasing the damage, good. I kind of wish it would be a little bit more, to be honest. But you know, beggars can't be choosers. Well, you know, tuning is still gonna happen. So, oh god, my hopium is back. Oh, this I kind of hate because this sucked already. The next ability damage on consuming a mark. Now, I'm not sure. I haven't had time to test this yet because I literally just sat down and started recording. But the next ability on the mark explicitly says ambush or mutilate. And this doesn't... mutilate damage. I mean, we already don't cast ambush because mutilate is just straight up better than ambush now with Flensing Knives. But even without, it's pretty close. So the fact that I mean, Flensing Knives kind of removes a lot of the mutilate damage, but I don't... Stop giving me mutilate damage. Like, just take this damage that you would have put on mutilate and put it onto the marks. Like, just done. And it would especially be better because mutilate does phys damage, and ambush also does physical damage. So I don't really care, but plague damage on consuming a mark, Zoldyck, Caustic, Shiv, remember the big three. Well, Mastery, big four. Mastery, Zoldyck, Caustic, Shiv. Those are the big four we care about, right? Just take this, remove this, add it to this. Happy, right? Happy. Fixed an issue. Thank God this was doing minus 30% instead of plus 60, and it made the tree completely unplayable. The numbers sucked real bad. And then the biggest of them all, we get the capstone when a target dies with the mark. It's no longer cringe and M+. Holy. But I do wish that it would get this treatment as well with like the duration increase. Darkest Night at the moment still, you know, has that shorter duration. If it dies and you're like, oh, I want to save it for the next pack in a Mythic Plus situation, if it's a long run, or like if you still got to kill a couple of stragglers and like it takes a little bit and so you're just sitting on the buff, you know, it could be a little bit weird. But I think it's great. The tree is playable. It's getting somewhere. We removed a bad talent that we didn't enjoy. We got a new talent which could be sick and is a very beloved trinket. Right, Inkpod, very beloved. We all loved it back in the Eternal Palace. So I'm happy with that. But Fatebound also got changes. We're eating twice. It's a 2-course meal. So Hand of Fate changes. Some of these make no sense. However, most of them are good. So the streak buff's having a duration. This is just to prevent cheese. You could previously, what you could do is you could stack it up on a dummy, and then like it's summoned in because the duration was on this. Heads buff increases damage by 3% plus an additional 1% per stack. I don't understand what the point of this is. The heads buff was already the weak one. The problem was that the heads buff wasn't stacking. And it wasn't working with auto attack damage. So like they nerfed this, and then the tails buff, the instant damage, was already stronger than the heads buff. But they buffed it baseline, and the tails buff goes down per stack. So this is reducing the RNG. So instead of having like a 20 flip chain, 20 tails in a row, and then doing a big like 500, 600,000 crit, it's going to be a lot lower, but it's going to be more consistent, which I think is good. But I don't like, why are we, what's with the heads? And it doesn't say here that they fixed the heads buff or like stacking, or it doesn't work with auto attacks. No mention of that being fixed either. So we're gonna have to test that today and tomorrow, and maybe during raid testing, depending on how much stuff I need to get through. But it's kind of weird that the heads buff is lower. I don't understand. like good change, but a little bit weird. And then they changed the capstone, so instead of primary, secondary, tertiaries, it's now just agility by 7, which I think, like, in my head, like, it's a little bit of a buff. The out of combat time increased to 15 seconds, good for Mythic Plus again. Deals cosmic damage, 170% to your target if you already have the lucky coin buff upon flipping the face for the 7th time in a row. So this is the stacking of the capstone now. So it doesn't. People always thought that, like, oh well, it's intended to stack because of all these stats being 1%. They're like, oh well, it'll go 1% and then 2%, but it never stacked. And I don't think the intent was that it stacked, because the all primary, secondary, tertiary by 1% was about a 5% overall buff. So I don't think it was ever intended to stack. But now we have something where you can stack it, right? So they kind of removed the RNG here of the base buff, but they added the RNG back into the capstone. However, this is very minimal, right? Very minimal, because realistically, if you're getting this once every, like, let's say, super unrealistic, you're getting a 7 coin flip every 30 seconds. That would require you to flip the same coin 7 times in a row in 30 seconds. That's 7 finishers in 30 seconds. A finisher every 4 seconds, and the coin hits, right? Super unrealistic, not happening, because you're going to break the chain beforehand. But let's just say 1 finisher every 4-ish seconds, and it hits, right? And you get your 7 in a row. That's 170% of tails every 30 seconds. It's not that great, considering that, like, in order to get there, you probably flipped tails a couple times, right? Like, let's just think. If you flip tails twice, it's already beating this. So 2 tails flips on a capstone, not that much. I'm not that concerned, but don't read into it too much. I don't know what the balancing is. They might just make this like 700. I don't know, like, depending on what they want to do with it. I think right now this is fine. And the Fate Intertwined buff, good. Fate Intertwined sucks really bad. Part of the problem is that it also does damage before Shiv. So if you Shiv in Venom and it crits, it doesn't duplicate the post Shiv damage. Like, if you, let's say your Venom does 100 damage, and with Shiv it does 130. So Fate Intertwined at 20% value isn't 20% of 130, it's 20% of 100. Because it calculates its damage beforehand. Which is a problem, because Shiv is kind of a big deal. So it also means that it doesn't work with other buffs. Like, I don't think it works with the heads buff. Don't quote me on that. Have to double check that. But this calculating pre-buffed damage is a bit of a problem for the balance of this. However, even with those fixed, 20% probably still not big enough. This probably got to go to like 25, realistically. But yeah, we also have a couple of changes here, which got data mined. This is the aura buff, and it seems like they zeroed out the aura buffs again. This is standard practice for the start of an expansion. You always have an aura buff, and, you know, all of the patch notes that are like, oh, plus 3%, plus 5%, reduced by 4%. All of those notes, they add up over time. And so the aura, right, which is all damage that the rogue does being changed, that was at 7%. So they reduced that down to 0 to zero it back out for the start of the expansion, and they just added this back onto these guys. So all of your abilities are doing the same damage, right? Don't get baited by this. This is the same damage. And I can actually show you with a calculator that this should be the same. If we do, like, let's look at Phantom Knives, right? 0.583. 0.53. 1.1. So it's about a 10% buff, right? 10% buff here, 10% buff everywhere. This is 10%, this is 10%, everything's 10%. And they zeroed out this. So this was 7. Slight buff, but realistically, not going to make a difference at all. It's just zeroing it out, new baseline, go, right? And that is pretty much all I have. Did I forget anything? No. Anyways, I had a video recorded going over Sims and stuff and bitching about Deathstalker, but now I can't, like, it was scheduled for an hour from now, but Blizzard decided to change stuff. So now I gotta pull that video down before it goes up and redo it and go simulate more stuff. Anyways, raid testing Thursday, raid testing Friday, streams constantly. We're back. Yeah, I'm going on vacation in July, so a lot less of me. Probably no videos all of July. I will be back at the start of the expansion, though. So I'm going to try and pump the content early. I'm going to try and pump the content. Let me know if there's questions, if you want to see something. I'm always looking at comments. And have a good one. Bye-ya!